Well, good morning and welcome to the next of these daily videos from Yoker Evangelical Church. It's Friday the 24th of April and this morning we started a new book and we read Numbers chapter 1. We also read Psalm 35, but in this video I'd like us to take a look at Numbers 1 because I think it is a fantastic book and I'm really excited that we are going to be reading it together as a church for the next month or so. So Numbers is the continuation of the story that we've been reading since Genesis, and it picks up exactly where Leviticus left off. The people have been receiving all this teaching from God, and in the book of Numbers we are going to see them moving off from Mount Sinai and start heading towards the Promised Land. Although, as we'll see as we read through Numbers, that doesn't work out perfectly. Ultimately, Numbers is a book that is a story of a rescued people. It is this same group of people that God rescued from slavery in Egypt, and God is taking them to live in the Promised Land, the place that He has set aside for them. And we see in this book that God is the one that takes care of His rescued people. He is the one that always takes the initiative in helping them to follow Him, in calling them back to Him. And sadly, through this book, again and again, the people grumble. They complain about God, they complain about Moses, and yet that allows us to see more fully that God is gracious with them. That even with His rescued people, God is capable of even more grace, more mercy. And it is helpful as we read the book of Numbers to see the similarities to ourselves. As Christians, we are now God's rescued people. By Christ's work on the cross, we are the ones that have been rescued from captivity, not to slavery in Egypt, but to slavery in sin. And as Christians living in this world, there are similarities to the book of Numbers. As God's rescued people, we are on our way to a promised land. That is heaven, being with Him. And yet, as we go on the way, just like the Israelites, we are a people that are prone to grumble against God. And yet we see time and time again in Numbers that He was gracious with His people then. And so we can be assured today that He will be gracious with us. In spite of that though, I think Numbers is a book that a lot of us struggle with. I've no doubt that as many of us opened our Bibles this mornings and we were confronted with the long list of names in Numbers chapter 1, I'm sure the thought that went through some of our heads was, why are we reading this? Why is this included in the Bible? What benefit is it giving me to read a list of names that I will never hope to remember? Numbers is a very varied book. A lot of it is stories about the people as they travel through the desert. There's also sections of poetry. There's sections of law where God tells His people what to do. But the thing that gives it its name is these lists of people where they are numbered. And today, this list may have seemed boring to you. It may have seemed like something that you could just skip over and not properly take in. We probably wondered, why do we need to know this? Why can we not just get onto the stories about snakes biting people and talking donkeys? Well, I want to try and encourage you this morning that there are good reasons why these lists are included in the Bible and how they encourage us today. So first, these lists give an air of authenticity. As people try and slander the Bible and accuse it of being a made-up document, the fact that the people stop and they count themselves and that we have those numbers should be an assurance to us that these things really happened, that these are the actual numbers that Moses was presented with and told these are how many people are living in Israel. And secondly, because it gives it an air of authenticity, these lists invite us into the world of the story. Now, it is true, if these lists were given to us without anything attached to them, they would be pretty boring. In the same way that any list or piece of information without the story around it can be quite boring. For example, if I was just to give you a list of 16 names off the top of my head, that would be pretty boring for both of us. And yet, if you have a grandparent who can tell you the 16 names of their grandchildren. That isn't boring to them. Because to them, that information isn't just there, it tells a story. As they're saying those names, they aren't thinking, this is a boring list. They're thinking, these are the names of my grandkids who I love. And so, in the same way, these lists in Numbers invite us into the story and to say, well, we've got these lists, what do they do? How do they help us? I think the big thing they do is show us that God is faithful. That is the third thing that these lists do. They teach us about God. If you were in Yoker Evangelical Church earlier in the year, we were looking at the book of Genesis. And in Genesis, we met a man called Abraham. Abraham was an old man, he had no children, and yet God came and spoke to him. Listen to what God said to Abraham. The Lord said to Abram, "Go from your country, your people, and your father's household to the land I will show you. I will make you into a great nation, and I will bless you. I will make your name great, and you will be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and whoever curses you, I will curse. And all peoples on earth will be blessed through you." Well, that was an amazing promise for God to give this old man, that he would become a great nation. At the time, it must have seemed impossible. And yet, the exciting thing when we get to Numbers is that we see that God has caused this to happen. Just listen to these words from Numbers chapter 1. These were the men counted by Moses and Aaron and the 12 leaders of Israel, each one representing a family. All the Israelites 20 years old or more who were able to serve in Israel's army were counted according to your families. The total number was 603,550. If Abraham had been reading this book, he would have been jumping up and down for joy, because he would have said, there it is, God was faithful. He told Abraham when he was an old man, childless, that he would become a great nation. And as we kick off the book of Numbers, we get this list that just reminds us God has caused this to happen. Everything between Genesis and now has been about getting to this point where the descendants of Abraham are spread out, and they are a great nation before God. All this to remind us that God is faithful. At these lists, when we attach them to the stories that they come with, stop being pointless information and they become helpful reminders of who God is. They point us back to Him and say, He's the one that caused this to happen. And that encourages us today, because it's this same God who we worship, we serve. And just as He was faithful back then to people living in a country a long way away, thousands of years ago, He was faithful to them. He is faithful to us today as well. And so Numbers helps us by reminding us of who God is. I hope you're all doing well in quarantine and hope to see you soon. God bless.